Welcome to the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. My name is Dave Deacon, and it is episode 103. So thank you for making your way back for a 103rd time. Okay, for the third time in the series that we're doing here. And while you're here, go ahead and hit the subscribe button on your streaming service so you will be the first to know when a new Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast drops. I promise you, you will be the envy of all of your friends. We're coming to you from Dr. Jason Warren's research lab on the agronomy farm at Oklahoma State University, where Oklahoma soil meets science. Go ahead and use that, Jason. I just came up with that. And actually, it turns out Dr. Warren's lab is a pretty good place to have the podcast this week because we are talking a lot about the soil below the Southern Great Plains, and we are actually answering a listener's email, too, about rotation and cover crops, so be sure and stick around for the second half of the program. Now, if you would like to ask the group a question, then jump over to reddirtagronomy.com and leave your question there, or send the email directly to us using your favorite email provider to podcast@reddirtagronomy.com, and we will magically get it and discuss your question on a future podcast. So without further ado, let's dive into a discussion about what is happening right now in the crops world across the Southern Great Plains and the science behind it. Here's Dr. Brian Arnell, and you are listening to the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast.
You know, everybody's running in. The big topic right now is fertilizer costs, along with grain costs, which the price, the value of grain is beyond me. We were just talking about that. It's just all over the board. But irregardless of how much we can get from that crop, that input cost across the board is just crazy, and there's no indication that we're going to see any kind of slide or reduction in cost when it comes to our fertilizer and other inputs. And so the big question that we're getting right now is, how do we deal with that? You know, how much do I put down? Can I cut? Is there a product I could use that I can get away with a lot less? Right. And so there's a whole world on that right now. Some of the basics, and if we just say the things we got to get out there and do and make sure that it's said, is that, you know, right now we're looking at fertilizer cost. Nitrogen is anywhere between $80 and $1, depending on what source and where you're at on the marketplace. Phosphorus is in the same range. Potassium is the same, and they're all very potentially going to go up a little bit. And so we look at that as like, okay, how can we do P&K better? How can we make sure that we don't lose yield, but we don't spend too much? And as much as some people hate to hear it, a soil test is a really, really good tool to utilize to find that. Now, you got to admit, if we get into it, it's like the soil test is not perfect. We want to get into that. Soil testing is a chemical method, a chemical analysis of a biological system. So is it perfect? No, it's not perfect.
It's a starting point.
It's a starting point. It's better than a random guess that said, hey, I did this for the last 25 years. I might try it again. It's a starting point. So if we could talk about that, is that, you know, we talk about our soil test for nitrogen and sulfur, and there's a lot of people that say, you know, sulfur soil test work in Kansas shows that it's not great. Well, it's not, because sulfur and nitrogen are both so tied with organic matter, and the decomposition, mineralization, and mobilization of organic matters that goes in and out of the cycle is it's a very fluid value. Plus, it's up and down vertically in the soil profile, with that sulfur moving up and down as we have rainfall, as we have evapotranspiration and pulling it back up. And so it's a tough value. Say, yeah, it's exact, but I want to tell you this: if I'm trying to grow a good crop and my soil test says I have 2 pounds of sulfur, I'm going to apply more sulfur. That's a given. I'll put 5 to 10 pounds down. If my soil test tells me I have 60 pounds of sulfur, I'm not applying sulfur. If I'm somewhere in the middle, if I'm in that 10 to 12 pound range, I'll look at conditions. I'll look at soil test. I'll look at that. We get a lot of talk also right now. These guys can join in about potassium. So Jason, you know, we got the wet soil, the dry soil, the high temp, the low temp drying. How do we do this on the analytics? And we try to figure out how to do soil test potassium better. And it's all focused in on this chemistry and the soil sampling, right? It's all about, how do we process it? We're not doing a good job. I think a big group of even the scientists are completely missing a big picture, is that there's two aspects. There's a plant and a soil.
Mm-hmm.
And And where I see, and Josh has seen this in beans a million times, is that sometimes we have plenty of potassium in the soil, and the soil test says we do, but we have a potassium response. Why? We have a clay layer that's limiting root growth, or we have, we have a clay film on the planter, so we have planter compaction, so we have limited root growth. So we have this beautiful plant, a soybean plant that has 50, 60 bushel soybean potential, or same with a cotton crop, and all of a sudden we have a tiny root. And a plant that needs to uptake 4 to 5 to 6 pounds of K per day during peak demand has a root that's 1/5 of the size of its above ground biomass. So there's no potential way to get to it. Is that the soil test screwing up?
No.
Oh, it's that we can't take into account in-season variables. And so what I keep saying is like, yeah, soil testing has its flaws if we acknowledge what's happening, if we acknowledge some of the issues with that, then we can learn. And that's also where I say all this fertility stuff is where we take advantage of in-season. Guess what? Potassium KCl0060 is a salt. It's a very soluble salt.
Mm-hmm.
You can apply it and get a little bit of rain, and it will go into the soil and be made available.
Yeah.
Now, Jason, you've got even better chemistry, and this is one I want you to kick up. I was told 2 weeks ago that when we apply potassium, it's not available for at least a year.
That's crazy. I mean, it's a salt. Its initial availability is going to be equivalent to ammonium nitrate or something like that. I mean, you can put ammonium nitrate on the ground, and it can not be available, and that's going to happen if it doesn't rain.
If it's still dry.
If it's still laying on the ground. But if you get moisture, which you're going to need to grow the plant, you're going to get that stuff dissolved, moved into the soil, and, probably 40% of your roots on the top 2 inches, right?
Yeah.
And then another, and then 60% are the top 6 inches. So where's the potassium going to be? It's going to be dissolved in the top 2 inches, and the roots are going to get it.
And K is more mobile than phosphorus, so it's not being quickly chemically bound. It's going to move down and slowly bind to those the CEC, the cation exchange sites, depending on your soil texture. And so you can have decent movement, especially with the first rainfall. So that's where we do. I've got guys, in-season potassium, if you're really trying to push yields, if you see any kind of rooting restriction, if you have high soil test.
Yeah. Well, and it just kind of popped into my head. Historically, like when we were in college, we talk about applying our phosphorus and potassium pre-plant, and that was the way to do it, right?
Yeah.
But was that the way to do it because that's the way we did it, and we assumed that they were immobile, and that's what they're classified as immobile nutrients, and so we put them out pre-plant, and then they're available all season, and so we just never did top dress them, whereas nitrogen's very mobile, sulfur's very mobile, so we wanted to put that out in season so that we don't lose it, right? So I think that historical perspective on putting out immobile nutrients in quotation prior to planting, that's just something that you can do because you can get it done before the rapid pace of the crop production year occurs. But I'm glad you brought it up because that's what was running through my mind, is that if we've got soils that are moderately deficient or maybe even at the right there threshold, why not wait and put that stuff out in season, at least on some acres, if because there's also some time limitations because you're going to be spraying to control weeds and all that kind of stuff. But if you can delay, because if it don't rain, it don't freaking matter. And fertilizing, some of those nutrients are going to be critical for crop health and drought tolerance. But there's like I say, if you're there, I mean, what do you think? Where can you go with that? You can't go out there and plant soybeans on a low soil test potassium soil without putting a little out there pre-plant, right?
If it's low, I want to put some pre-plant out to make sure it's there, but I'm talking those mid to highs. The guys are still putting it out there because I think they need it. Or, if bean prices hold, I want to capture that price, but I don't want to spend unneeded money until I know I need to capture that price.
So, like, if you're in a program where you're putting out replacement K rates on, you could put that. I mean, if you want, you're hell bent on putting that replacement out, wait and put it out in the season.
Yeah, that's another story
to see if your crop's going to pay for it. Right?
Absolutely, yeah. And now, I'll say before we get to the replacement, Josh, you got. You're
he's over there
looking starry-eyed over here. You're
Well,
about to jump in.
I want to go back at some point in time to the sampling thing, and it's something that as I was a student, and and it's not gotten any better. is we always say this is not a good way to tell what potassium levels are in the soil, and I always sat there and I questioned. I was like, you don't know what potassium levels are in the soil. Like it's our best guess. Every test is our best guess because we don't actually know anything of what is available in the soil.
I got a comment about that.
Well, come on, man, come on.
Okay, so
well, but
go ahead,
hold on. So you go back to the whole thing, and it was a big deal. And I've talked to Brian a lot about it. Is whenever we were in Louisiana, there was this whole big push that high drying heat cracked the mineralogy. That's not even a word. The mineralogy of that clay soils,
or the minerals of the clay.
Yeah, and it released inner sheet potassium, making that number appear higher. And so we would have these really high potassium values, and then we'd get this really significant response to potassium, and we're like, oh. And then there was this whole thing on, well, you need wet potassium is the best way to do it. It gives you a more accurate. I'm like, one, because, and it's always good when you talk about soil tests to go back to the difference in precision and accuracy. Accuracy means you're hitting the bullseye. That means that you have to know where the bullseye is first.
Accuracy means you hit the bullseye on average. If you have 1,000 points, then the average is a bullseye.
Yeah. They don't have to be in the bullseye.
You don't have to be in the room on 10% of them.
Go ahead, because this is good stuff right here.
But I always go with that thing of it's good to have a soil test, and I love soil testing. I highly encourage everybody to soil test. But we often say just because you've done it for 25 years doesn't mean that you know what don't rely on that, but you got to rely on that some, because that error, that trial and error process is a good point. And kind of like what you said, you have to know what's going on out there, and then get your other tool, which is your soil test, and say, okay, so we have the soil test, which gives us a range potentially, but we have to know how it reacts in the soil and stuff like that. Plus we have to kind of adjust ourselves to that environmental factor, or even a feasibility factor of, hey, if we can't put it out ourselves, we have to have the co-op put it out. They have to have the material to feasibly put it out. So I'll let you go to the
go ahead,
okay,
Brian.
so I want to chase this mineral thing because I want both of you guys to follow me on this. So recently, and this has been bouncing around in my head, so let's play the game. A lot of times I hear, and the same with the mineral. So give me a brief description of the soil that would come back with the mineralogy that would be that way.
I mean, it's probably the
boom.
Oh man!
Let's get to the mineralogy. We're going deep now.
No, I'm just saying a generic description.
Yeah, like
a tight soil,
probably
a heavy clay,
the
or
2-to-1. Especially with. If you think about the really heavy clays that especially the ones that shrink swell, that have those big cracking soils and stuff like that, that's where we typically got that comment on.
Now, Jason, riddle me this, Batman. So, high magnesium soils in Oklahoma. What if I tell you you're going to go to the field and you have the really high mag ratio soil? Is there anything that pops up in your head on that?
Well, I mean, there's a concept of.
I'm just the soil. Like, you go out and what you would expect to walk on a piece of ground that's high mag.
Philosopher Jason here.
I don't know. I mean, because I have guys ask me about high mag soils, and I don't worry about them. It's kind of like worrying about a high calcium soil. Yeah. I'm growing 280 bushel corn on a high calcium freaking soil under irrigation in the Panhandle, and it's got issues. Particularly if, along with that high calcium, it's got high pH, but it's the freaking pH that's causing the big problem.
So
right?
You're right. So this is the train of thought I'm going. The high mag soils because I've been getting the same thing on potassium. Is that we have this mag ratio and we have to add potassium fertilizer because these high mag soils have response to potassium. I think it's very similar. Is that the high mag soil, that magnesium is not necessarily the cause, and this is just me as a soil. It's not the cause of the response. It's actually the situation where those high mag soils tend to be high clay soils. we tend to be tighter soils that are more likely to have a restricted rooting zone, rooting layer. Because guess what? That shrink swell soil, you're not going to get the same root as a deep silt loam. And so now is it really that it? So
what is the freaking soil test K level?
Soil test K level let's say 200 ppm, and they get a response.
Meh.
But it'd be the same thing with those shrink swell. It's that. So my deal is that, okay, so the soil test is telling us it's high. I truly believe that there's probably a good amount of plant available, and we see that, okay, it's the 2-to-1s or it's the high magas. I am more and more believing it is the soil environment that is limiting the roots to access that available because of the situation. So the high magnesium might give us an indication that we're going to have a K response if rooting's limited due to some environment because it's a heavy clay.
Yeah.
And so it's not necessarily, and so for me, it doesn't really matter, I guess, but instead of saying, oh, I got to fertilize these high mags, well, it's not because it's high mag, it's because your soil conditions, the clay mineralogy, and the formation factors have resulted in it being higher magnesium. It's not the ratio, it's that you have high magnesium soils in these conditions. Because I can make a high mag soil. I have made high mag soils in silt loams. It doesn't influence my K response.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, but most of the time, I definitely see this, and I think there is some indication that there's a marginally sufficient soil that end up not seeing a response.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The biggest complaints I've seen in this situation always gets brought up, and I'm not saying that it's right or wrong. All I'm saying is that you have a sufficient, or let's say a 10 to 15% over sufficiency.
Yep.
And you still get a response.
Well, that's what I'm talking about, Josh.
But you're then saying that. So what's wrong? So the potassium is the wrong source. The soil test is the wrong soil test, or we're growing the wrong. I mean, because the tool that I'm given, that we're saying is good tool, says that I don't need anything.
So what I'm saying is it's not the tool. It's that take the freaking blinders off and look beyond just a soil test, and let's look at the soil environment. Let's look at what we're dealing with here instead of being narrow-minded as like, oh, the soil test, and it's not the soil test is all in be all. It is that, and it's the combining the soil test by the soil system, right? It's looking at more system. So if I come in and I'm getting a heavy clay, or if I go up to Ottawa County and I get into some of those heavy clays, even though there's plenty of K up there in some of those soils because they've been putting litter on, if I go up there and the beans are 12 to 14 inches tall and I pull it out of the ground and there's 3 inches of root, I want to guess I get a good response to potassium.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we did up in Rendell's this last year. I mean, that's what we saw is like decent soil test K, but when you have a plant this 2 foot tall almost and the roots go down 3 inches and then kind of say, I'm done.
Well, but I think you have to comment, and for those of you that didn't get a chance to come to Winter Crop School and hear Brian Pugh's great talk about potassium, is you have to talk about that aspect as well, because you talk about limiting root layers, and there's some crops like soybean that we thought were awesome in being able to get deep tap roots, because if given the right opportunity, they do.
Yeah.
But as Brian Pugh said, is if faced with any sort of restriction, it limits that root.
Yep.
So something that you have to kind of take into account, like you said, is everything going on is that same soil next year with corn might have zero issues.
Oh, absolutely. I see the same thing
because corn could potentially get through that limiting layer, but soybean. If it has this situation that it has water, it has a clay pan or something like that, just has that very limited root growth. I'm going to do a taproot until I hit restriction, and then I'm just going to grow from there.
I see the same thing in full season double crop in the same field. I can grow full season beans and not see a K response, and then come back in the same field a couple years later and grow double crop and have response. Now, it's not because the double crop's hot and dry necessarily, because the full season cut 60 and the double crop cut 55. So to get double crop 55, it's not a drought year. I mean, it's just not. What's the difference is that double crop, because of the time, goes to reproductive much quicker. It doesn't put the efforts in, and when that soybean crop's growing, it starts transitioning from vegetative growth, which is heavily root vegetation growth. You go into reproductive, the amount of efforts it puts into the root growth starts going backwards.
Well,
Right?
I want to go back. I want to hear Jason's comment when we talked about the mineralogy on.
Well, so my comment was back when I was in graduate school at Virginia Tech, that I was looking at all this soil data because I used to be a nutrient management guy, and I had this Bray 1 soil test P data, and it was deficient according to soil test. I was out in the middle of Virginia in a place called Orange, Virginia, and I wasn't getting any yield response to corn or fescue. Went to the Eastern Shore. Of course, the soil test was high as crap out there. So I go into my advisor's office, the late, great Greg Mullins, and I sit down, and I say, this soil test is crap. And he leans back in his chair. He's like, oh, really? Tell me a little bit more about this soil test that's crap. And for those, many of you guys don't know Greg Mullins, but he was essentially the Highland Zong of Auburn, and then he moved and was the Highland Zong of Virginia Tech.
He's a grand poopah.
He was awesome. And so I start rambling on, how kids do. And he says, well, what would you use otherwise? And I'm like, I don't know, it's something better than this. And he said, this has been calibrated. It's not perfect for every soil, but it's been calibrated and validated across the state of Virginia and across the United States. And it is pretty good on the aggregate. But there are soils in which it will, and situations in which it will not work perfectly. But it is better than the alternative, which is nothing. And so that's always stuck in my mind. And it's also like Gordon Johnson, I don't know, Brian, you replaced him, right?
Yeah.
And so
I don't know where he's going with this, so I'm sitting back.
Another comment that he made, he was, the nutrient management extension specialist prior to Brian, and he says, Jason, it's real easy to be critical. And so those are things that come from the guys of years past that we have to think about. Is it easy to be critical? Yep. And then you have to think about what alternatives we have. And when we have situations where these tests don't work, we need to explore them, like Brian says, and maybe do some on-farm testing, put some strips out or something like that, to figure it out and see if we're spending money on good stuff, because everything what Brian's saying makes sense to me. But the soil test is a foundational piece of information, in my opinion, every day of the week.
It's foundation, but you have to understand what it does and its limitations. There are, without question, limitations to those. And so it's like,
even on the potassium, I'll go back to potassium, and maybe we'll have Highland on here sometime to really dig into some of the soil test, like analysis and protocols that he uses. But I'm pretty sure Highlands run, oven-dried temperature and experiments on, benchmark soils in Oklahoma. And I don't want to speak out of turn, but my recollection in discussing it with him is that he really didn't see a problem. One problem, and I see this with a lot of analytics, because most guys just see me out flapping my mouth talking about soil and this and that, but I'm pretty anal about analytics, and one of the challenges with running wet soil through a lab is it may be more accurate in quotation marks, but it is a shotgun blast because it grossly increases your error. Yep. So if you send a sample in, you're probably going to need to send 10 samples in to get an accurate number to overcome the variance that not just because you have field variance, and we can talk about that, but then you have analytical variance, and the running a wet soil through a sieve and then analyzing it in the soil increases that analytical error.
Just sampling
by
1 gram out of a wet soil bag,
and so
to put into extraction is a.
But when you dry it, grind it, sieve it, then you create what another late great guy, Lucian Zelazny, called reagent grade dirt. Yep. And that's the only time you get to call soil dirt. Yep. But it's not dirt anymore because it's in a freaking cup. And you make highly homogenized soil that goes through that lab. So there's, laboratory stuff.
I didn't even think about
I kind of geek out.
The wet soil. That's absolutely right. When you're sampling, I work. We've done it for our whole careers, and we worked in soils labs as grad students and such, and undergrads. That sampling procedure where you're wearing that out. Not only do you have that, but you have this mass difference. You have is it 10% moisture, 30% moisture, influence of mass of that, and then sampling a filled moist clay and trying to homogenize 2 grams.
Yeah, do that. And is it 20% moisture or 40% moisture, or is it 10% moisture when you take it out of the ground?
And of course we can dry and figure that out, but that one little scoop or that one little measurement that was collected could have been a clod that was 10% more moisture than another portion of the bag that was sent in.
Well,
yeah, it's exhausting.
So let me ask you a question on all of this. Like, there's these whole things you guys talked about, the wet soil extraction. There's a lot of various things on, like, room temperature drying, cold drying. Is there any validity to any of these?
There might be if you want to wait an extra 4 to 5 days for your sample analysis.
Well,
do you want it tomorrow or do you want it in a week and a half?
Yeah. So like with the soil health movement, right, and the soil health, protocols that we have for assessing soil health. There's a lot of those that say, we want to run wet soil, or we want to run air-dried soil. Air-dried, as long as it's dried, I don't care. But as long as that soil's moist, there's biological activity in it. And as soon as you take it out of the ground, you've still got microbes churning. But when you've got soil in the ground doing its function, the aeration, the environment is completely different. And when I take a probe and I stick it in the ground and I pull it out, I've changed the environment in which those microbes, and then I kind of smoosh it up, and then I put it in a bag and I put it in a refrigerator at 40 degrees, and I hope that it's cooled down to slow down the microbial activity. And then I take it out and I put it on a bench for a week. Well, if the humidity is 80%, it's going to take a week for that to dry. And all that time, a little bit of microbial activity is happening. So then what's the value of that microbial test that I do at the end of the day? In contrast, if I take it out and I throw it in an oven at 65 degrees and it's dry in 12 hours, then I've stopped everything. Now, people would argue, and they have with me, is that I've altered the biological character of the soil by drying it. Well, show me the test where that's better or worse than when you take it right out of the ground, because as soon as you take it out of the ground, you've changed it. And piddle farting around, drying it in an oven, in high humidity air, you're altering everything you're doing is altering what's in that soil as you take it from the ground into the lab. But the longer it is in a active state, aka moist, the more uncertainty you have, in my opinion, and then you're causing greater and greater likelihood of variability in the analytical process. Because, like I say, if I'm in the Panhandle and it's 5% humidity, it'll be dry in 12 hours. And then what's room temperature and what's room humidity? It's just kind of exhausting.
That's why if I'm trying to really do highly accurate nitrate, carbon, and ammonium test, I pull the sample and immediately put it in the freezer. I have a deep freeze setting on the trailer that has a generator running so that I can, and set as low as that deep freeze will go so it can freeze as quick as possible to stop biological activity.
Yeah.
Pop it out of the freezer, cut it real quick, and then put it in the oven, because any biological activity is converting carbon to carbon dioxide, or converting nitrogen into mineral nitrogen, or into organic nitrogen into mineral nitrogen, and all these biological activities are going to occur at room temperature moisture.
Yeah.
So you got to freeze it, you got to dry it if you want to cut to that point. So that's on our high-end carbon nitrogen sampling. It goes straight to the freezer, then straight to the oven, just to stop that biological process.
And then what's real fun, is what I think about as well when we run analytics, is how does that compare? Well, because we're doing research, but then our research is supposed to be transferable to farmers. How does any of that information compare to the soil test or soil samples that the farmers take?
Yeah. No.
they piddle fart around or whatever. I don't know.
Putting
Maybe
a Ziploc
there's
baggie
all
for
maybe
3.5
all of
weeks
them
in
that
their
soil
truck.
test are going to go out there with a refrigerated truck and shove all those soil
Right.
samples in there and then drive them to Stillwater.
This was research.
And then-
You know that. You're
but,
just giving me
no, I'm
grief.
just giving you hell. But you think about it, like what's going on in that sample that the producer
Yep.
gets, and then brings it, to the extension office. They box it up and send it to the lab.
Yep.
I mean, it's spending a lot of time in its native
Yep.
moisture
Yep.
and temperature. And I got a buddy who runs a UPS truck, and it's hot in the summertime on a UPS truck, and so there's all kinds of stuff to think about on the analytical side and the sample history and all those things. But anyway,
Well,
I digress.
so I'll maybe we should move on from the sampling point, but I'll
You started it.
send.
Yeah, I was wondering how we even got here.
Thanks, Josh.
I'll do a send off on just saying, like, if growers are interested in getting that great sample, what do you recommend? Not piddle farting around for 3.5 weeks is fine, but like if they want to get the best sample available, what steps should they be taking if they are in like Cimarron County, which they
Right.
can't drive to Stillwater?
Right.
Well, so we talk about this we're talking about the soil health stuff, the nitrogen carbon stuff, which is fairly more academic. You talk about a soil test sample that a farmer sends in and the amount of biological activity to determine their nitrogen on a composite that was probably pulled with 15 points. Let's pretend they're going to do 15 points on a quarter section. There's enough variance in that where that nitrogen and all. And again, it's nitrogen sample, so you're already acknowledging that, okay, if it rains, it's going to change. If it gets hot, it's going to change. If it gets dry, it's going to change. The P, the K, those things in the pH that we really can hinge upon, especially in that Cimarron County, can be just fine. But I will say is that, and I want to throw this out before I forget, is that if we talk about the recommendations and the things that need to be done, is that if you're running off of a composite sample, and we're talking, I want to go back to summer crops, so this is just my recommendation. High fertilizer cost, I don't want to spend a lot of money. How do I do that? If my composite comes in anywhere near critical or below, so let's say on the phosphorus, our critical threshold on phosphorus is 32.5 ppm or 65 soil test. If I have a soil test that comes back at 30 or at 34 on the composite, that means that on average I'm going to have 0 to no response if I add phosphorus. But if I look at a quarter section or even an 80, that quarter section, that 32 that I got is an average, just a 50 percentile. And probability is there's pieces of the field that's 15 and the pieces of the field that's 60. So putting down Dapper map, a little bit of Dapper map in furrow, a little bit of a 1034-0 to cover that. Also on pH, if your pH composite is a 5.7, you've probably got some 5.2s. Yeah. You've probably got some 6.5s. A little bit of starter this year to get that phos in for pH. And I'll admit, I see zero value for nitrogen in starter. It is the phosphorus in the starter. It's the metals in the starter. It's those things that are needed on those soils. It's not the nitrogen. I don't worry about adding more nitrogen in the starter. It's just there earlier. It's the P, zinc, and iron in the high pHs that really have a value. So don't forego that starter, and it doesn't have to be special. It can be just the traditional phosphorus because it will be available in our temperatures, and make sure that you know those variances in the fields and take advantage of that.
I do have a question on that, just for the basics. What is it in the phosphorus and the metals that makes it important that it goes in at the starter? I know that certain nutrients do certain things to the plant.
Well, so it's initiation phosphorus. For one thing, phosphorus in the starter is a lot of it is that it's so important for root growth and root exploration. And when you put phosphorus as a starter, you're banding it, meaning you're concentrating it, means it's more available longer. And so you can get away with less. If you're trying to do your phosphorus rec as a starter, it takes lesser in furrow. Which also goes back to, I know it's going sideways, Jason mentioned replacement. So replacement is that where we replace the P and K that we removed in yield. It's not something that Oklahoma State on average recommends, but in high production systems, it's needed to maintain the mass balance of what we remove and what we replenish. I'm looking at fertilizer price this year. I'm not doing 100% replacement. I might do 25 to cover a basis.
Right.
Yeah.
replacement is exponentially higher than sufficiency what the crop needs. Yeah. So if I'm doing replace, by the way, farmers out there, if you do replacement or if you use a yield factor for your P and K, you're doing replacement, you're never going to be low on P and K because you're already you're applying more than the crop needs for that season. You're doing a replacement factor.
Yeah, and they can take advantage of that banked nutrient, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is like, I feel stupid because I don't fertilize unless soil test tells me to, and I'm glad it doesn't tell me to this year for P and K.
Right.
But sooner or later it will, you know.
Will, yeah.
And so you can take advantage of that banked nutrient.
I would say
doing that.
So. This is one thing. If you have somebody making your recommendations, ask them how they make it. Are they doing full replacement? Are they doing 50% replacement? Are they doing? Because you know what? If you still want to replace some, I wouldn't do 100%. I'd do 33 or 50%. Pull that down. Make sure you know what your soil test is, that you're above the sufficiency recommendation. Mm-hmm. But you don't have to be full replacement this year. It's not 1 year of not having replacement. Jason, you're the soil scientist here. 1 year of not doing replacement, is it going to crash your soil bank of P and K?
No.
How often do you take the samples? Once a year, once a crop, halfway or twice a crop? I don't know.
For me, it's management and what they're doing management-wise. About like 3 to 5 years. I don't even like, and there's going to people, I don't like grid every 3 to 5 years. I want point samples every 3 to 5 years. And if you really want to be high-intensive management, I really like having points in a field collected every year. If I'm trying to adjust my management strategy into a build and maintain, I want to pick 6 or 7 spots in every field, and I go sample those the size of this table. So a 10 by 10 area, I want to pull those every year so I can see how that spot of the field reacts to my management of build and maintain.
Yeah, that brings, because you make the comment, and it's very true. If you go out and take an aggregate sample of 15 cores and 160 acres, and it comes back and everything is right at threshold, well, like Brian says, you're going to have areas, statistically, you have a high likelihood of having areas that are deficient and then areas that are high, and that's what is going into the average. And so I'm glad Brian brought up sampling those points, because, whether it's based on a soil map or just a random grid, collection, is maybe if you've got time, go out there and take it from points in the field. Mm-hmm. If you have yield maps, you can maybe use those, or soil maps, you maybe use those just to see what the variance is, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't know. Potentially, if you're lucky, you can go out there and take 10 point samples off that field that's right at the margin of optimum, and they're all right there.
Yeah.
And then you've kind of got a golden ticket, maybe.
But I doubt it, but maybe.
But you know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then with that knowledge, you can gain more and more knowledge. And, of course, we're kind of coming to the end of the time where we've got time to mess with that, depending on how big a farmer you have and how many acres. But it's at least worthwhile to start thinking about.
Coming up next on Sample Talk, is it Soil Sample Talk? I forget. Anyway, but coming up after the break, we are going to the mailbag. We're going to be talking cover crops. Stick around. You're listening to the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. And I don't need to tell you that was a very in-depth conversation about the accuracy of soil tests and all the nutrients in the soil. Now, for more information about what the doctors talked about, you can find it at reddirtagronomy.com under the podcast section. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, Josh, Jason, and Brian answer a very interesting question from a listener about cover crops and rotations in western Oklahoma. If you have a question for the group, send us an email to podcast@reddirtagronomy.com or send us a tweet. Our handle is reddirtag on the Twitter sphere. Now, with that said, you are listening to the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. I want to say special thanks to John Biggs for sending in this email here. I'm going to boil it down. He's been doing no-till with cover crops in west central Oklahoma since 2015. He wants to talk about rotation in cover crops, and so I'm just going to throw it out there. Two of the greatest minds in crops and soil are sitting at this table. What's the odds of that happening? And I'm just going to dive in. Josh, what's your thoughts on rotation in cover crops?
I thought you were going to the two great minds.
Well, we're going to start with you and then work our way.
We're going to go up the scale.
Right,
I see.
Right.
I see. Yeah. So cover crops within a crop rotate. We've looked at this a lot over the last several years.
Right.
I am a big proponent of cover crops in a system that can support them.
Right.
And I think that is one thing that that you have to kind of always have in your mind, is that not all of our systems, especially here in the state of Oklahoma, can support cover crops. Mm-hmm. Most of the time when growers call me and they say I'm interested in cover crops, most of the time the first thing I ask them is, why? Like, where did you see something in a magazine? Did you hear a presentation? Right. Did you see a YouTube video? Like, what spurred that interest? And a lot of times it was been a presentation or something that they've seen, and the next question I then ask is what is your goal? Mm-hmm. What's your goal of integrating cover crops into a crop rotation? And if you don't have that, we can't start. It's a non-starter. Because cover crops are not a set it and forget it. You can't plant it and then get 27 beneficial things from a cover crops without doing any sort of inputs, thinking about what you're getting and stuff like that. So it's those kind of questions that we go through first, of saying, what are you actually wanting? Where did you get your information from? And how do you feasibly go about reproducing or obtaining those goals? Because most of the time it's, we need to be able to do one or two things really well.
Yeah.
We can't do 7 things really well, especially with just integrating just cover crops. If we integrate a whole system, it's a different story we can talk about. But integrating cover crops, we can probably do 1 or 2 things really well. We can do a couple things okay, but we can only do 1 or 2 things really well.
So just for definition purposes, what is a cover crop?
Yeah, that's probably Dave, I will buy you a lunch if we can get 7 people in a room to describe what a cover crop is successfully, and it be acceptable to everybody.
Yeah.
Because realistically, what you just do is it's a crop, which that's a key word. It is a crop,
right?
That you would plant out there to cover the ground. It's a lot different than what we think about cover crops, Jason, right now. Is basically the original mentality is it's something that we didn't have bare soil, especially when we were in heavy tilled environments, just didn't have the ground moving in these tough conditions.
Exactly.
I mean, originally it was green manure. I mean,
well, and that's the funny.
Really
like, what is
back.
a green manure? You know what I mean? Like, you have a cover crop, and then people talk about green manures, and then, we have now where we're planting cover crops and then running cattle on them. Personally, I would call that a forage crop, and I would want to optimize the forage productivity with a balance of nutrient removal and whatever. But that's what it's kind of morphed into, undefined. Really, the question, he's like, what kind of rotation do we want? That's really what's critical.
Right.
What is the rotation? What are the outputs of that rotation? And what are the impacts on the long-term productivity of the soil? That's a useful discussion. To say we want a cover crop, like Josh said, you got to have a reason to do that. And you got to understand the pros and cons of doing that. Right?
Yeah. I mean, because that's a good point. There are cons, and it's something that sometimes we can overcome or we don't care about.
Yeah.
And maybe Jason's right on the turn, and just fallow season cover, that would be just as good. But it's just what do you want? What do you want from it?
And do I want this, and back when I did a lot of cover crop stuff, we were planting cover crops into wheat stubble.
Yeah.
Wheat stubble's pretty damn good cover. Why do I need to destroy that to plant something that may or may not come up? Now, if I get good rains and I get 5 tons of sorghum Sudan out there, then I've created a lot of cover. but then there's ramifications of that.
Well, and Dave, I'll be the broken wheel. It's what do you want?
Yeah.
And there are some people that want a degree of cover, but do need a forage. And so that's a cover crop, but it's also a forage crop, and it's these other things, and you would select certain species to go in that and certain species not to go in that. And, I think the more complex thing is building it into a successful rotation. Exactly. And once again, you have to decide for yourself what is the measure of success.
So let's take that to Western Oklahoma. Let's say, Elk City. What is going to be a good cover crop in that area, and then maybe a rotation between all of those cover crops?
What's your goal, Dave?
My goal, okay. So my goal in Western Oklahoma is to plant a seed and not have to irrigate it, and to have something come out of the ground that I can make a little money off of. Be it, I'm not going to say the forage route. Let's say that we can get a cash crop out of it.
Well, and so then you go to the same thing. Is are you planting a cover crop or a cash crop? Because that is ultimately that we have seen. This whole intent that we have cover crops is we always want something green out on the landscape, because the theory is that's how Mother Nature wants it to be. Well, in Western Oklahoma, that was Jason Warren clearing his throat. In Western Oklahoma, you can blatantly see that's not how it is
exactly.
all the time.
Yeah,
Thank you, Josh.
is we need some periods of rest, especially for those systems. Potentially some fragile soils out there, a moisture profile that doesn't support green all the time. Now you go to Eastern Oklahoma, and you're green a lot of the time, and so you can mimic nature, quote, if you want to, by having something green all the time, because most of the time your environment supports that, but not all the time. And so it's we've run data. Myself, I've just recently finished a project with Texas A&M that said just intensifying your grain system is just as healthy and productive to your soil as adding a cover crop in there.
Why?
So we looked at double crop grain sorghum and double crop soybeans and compared that to wheat going into a summer fallow, a summer cover crop going into a wheat system again, and basically said that all the benefits you get from this active root at all times and all that are obtained with a soybean crop or a milo crop. You just get to cut it at the end of the year and take it to the co-op, hopefully, to get a profit. And like Jason said,
let's clarify.
Hold on. And like what Jason said, the cover that's added through milo residue and wheat residue is great to shield the soil to protect against those.
Just to clarify, so what you're saying is that you're growing wheat, you harvest the wheat, and then you plant those double crops, milo and soybeans, and then you compare those to a cover crop that is then, either harvested or terminated, and then you're planting wheat back into it. Mm-hmm. And the outcome from with respect to soil biological parameters and whatnot is the same.
Was the same. Yeah.
And then was it better than the standard continuous wheat summer fallow?
Yeah, it was better than just going completely empty during the summer. I'm not saying that economically it was.
Yeah.
And that's another aspect all in itself, because you are putting inputs, because we did have a time that our summer crop in a tight rotation like that did not yield very well. But it's still from a biological from a system like that it was very similar to having a cover crop out there. Now, when you go economics and you start adding in cost and inputs and et cetera, then you're talking about a whole new ball game. But yes, I mean, it was better to have something there, intensification of that system. It was better to have something there at all times. It in certain years, especially west, we had one out in Woods County, just was not as good from an economic standpoint.
Yeah. Well, and you should have been in the meeting yesterday, Josh, because we had a meeting on a NEFA-funded project where the economists were running some estimates of yield and profitability on continuous double cropping of corn and milo and soybeans. And it spurred some conversations with a farmer later that I had yesterday afternoon. But like you say, is if you want the soil health benefits and you want to eliminate that fallow, why not grow a grain crop that has a probability of failure instead of growing the cover crop? Now the answer is, when grain prices, when wheat's $3 and corn's $3.50 and milo's $2.25, well, I'd rather grow the forage, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what a lot of guys have done, have went into, where they're trying to get additional forage out of the summer. But now that soybeans are $14, corn $7. Why not get after the grain? Unless you are a dedicated cattleman.
Well, but it's
woman.
still kind of like what Dave said. I don't want to put any inputs, and that's still okay because we have options.
Yeah, but you're going to spend money.
I've talked to growers that inherently put sorghum out, and if they have to put any inputs in, they'll just green chop it.
If you don't want to put inputs
in,
then you fallow. That's what's called no inputs.
But there's still inputs to fallow. You got to spray the crap to keep the weeds out, or
not
plow
everybody
it.
Apparently. I've seen some pretty ugly fallow fields. But
well, then they're farming with nature and they're cover cropping with invasive weeds. Whatever.
Let me spur off of this. Is that what? I hate to interrupt the argument because it can go forever.
This has been fun.
Why not just say that we're in the Central Great Plains and we should be adaptive and change based upon environment, market, and soil. And even so you have the goal. Like Josh, you said, you got to get a goal. Absolutely. What's your goal? Is it money? Is it cattle? Is it grain? Is it soil conditions? Is it less time working?
Mm-hmm.
And then acknowledge that, that bottom ground that is a deep silt loam might be treated differently than that eroded side ground on the other 40 across the road.
Yeah.
Well, and it's true, and that's kind of what I was saying, is that you can do one thing really well. So, I might be able to do really good on soil. If I want to build aspects of soil, fine. I'm sure me and Jason can work you around, and we can develop this cover crop that has a ton of carbon in it, and you can deposit a ton of carbon, get a lot of residue, shield your soil. Your next crop might be horrible.
You're going to spend a lot of money.
You're going to spend a lot of money on nitrogen. You're going to potentially lose some money, but you've benefited the soil, and so you just have to be okay with, this is my goal, and some of the other parts might go down because of it, but that's okay, as long as you can live with those consequences. That's the overall general thing. Is I think too many folks have heard this. You can be economically viable, build your soil health. You can get great water. It can be done on the cheap.
It increases nutrients.
It increases, and some years you might be able to do all those, but over a 10-year period, the likelihood is you're going to do one or two things really good, and the other two or three things are going to have to be limited, or you're going to have to take a loss on those, and you're going to have to be okay with that.
Yeah. Well, and like I say, it's kind of a fascinating deal. And the interesting thing and cool thing about like the soil health movement and like this effort to get like cover crops into our cropland is the change in mentality about grazing cropland. When we started, and before you started, there was a lot of concern about grazing no-till cropland. So we did some work, and what we found is, as long as you don't overgraze it, you're not going to have a compaction problem.
Yeah.
And it's really the same thing with any grazing system. If you overgraze it, you're going to have a friggin' problem. And it's because you're not necessarily damaging the soil itself, but you're putting such great stress on those plants that their root activity and root extensiveness goes down, and then removal of those roots is what makes the soil susceptible to compaction, right? Well, then you're going to introduce a cover crop, and you're running cattle on that, and however you want to do it. I'm not a cattle guy or a grazing expert, but you're going to have those growing roots in there, and you're going to be able to return some revenue, hopefully. And so that was good, because when I came to OSU, I mean, we had high grain prices back in 08, and here and there, much better than it was in 2017. And then there was a transition where nobody, he was pretty short on making money on grain. So then we introduced more cattle, and now we know we can do that. And that opens us up to more effective crop rotations under a conservation system. And so when you, when you think about, Brian or Josh said it multiple times, is like, what do you want to do? If you want to run continuous cropping and you have cattle, well, you have a little more flexibility, in my opinion, because there's going to be a period of time where you're not going to make grain in that continuous system in western Oklahoma, like Weatherford, you say. But if it rains...
I think he said Elk City, sir.
Elk
yeah.
City.
Yeah, we're going
Okay.
western.
But, but if you do that, and you say you're running continuous wheat, and then you're going to put a cover crop or grain, sorghum, or soybean in the middle of that and grow year-round, know that you're going to fail something.
Yeah.
And then that summer cover is potentially going to negatively impact your fall forage. And the farther east you go, the less likely that is, but it's still likely. Generally not always going to cause a great impact on your grain yield, but it will impact that forage in the fall, which is kind of important for a guy running cattle.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that, me and you have run around and have gotten some negative opinions on sometimes when we talk about cover crops, because we aren't always talking about the 2 or 3 good years. We focus sometimes on the 2 or 3 bad years to let people know this is the risk you're going to have to run. Yeah. Because most of the time, at least when I work with growers, they're risk adverse. Yeah. So they're willing to be this 2 or 3 good years. They're hoping for that. They're willing to have this 4 or 5 middle of the ground years, as long as they minimize these years that are high risk. And that's I think the big thing of everybody kind of coming together is that certain realms will talk only about these 2 or 3, and maybe we're not doing the true service by focusing on these 2 or 3 down here, and we should talk about more, kind of the middle ground. But you have to know that that's there. You have to know that risk is overhanging, because like you said, even if you're going to intensify a system and just go wheat summer crop, at some point in time, your system's going to catch up to you, and you're going to have to either fallow or you are going to fail a crop. And you got to be okay with that, because you might have been benefiting the previous 2 or 3 crop seasons to hang that fail, but you have to have that in your mind, that potential of a really tight rotation, because you're talking about planting wheat late. You're talking about planting your summers late. Unless you have that reset in there, that fallow at some point in time, then you're always going to be behind. And we know in a personal life or in agriculture, if you're always behind, it's going to catch up to you at some point in time.
Yeah. Well, and it's fun that we're talking about this today, because yesterday, I won't name names because I don't like naming names in public unless I get permission, but one of our friends from Woods County, we were talking yesterday. And
from a W county somewhere that way.
We were talking yesterday about crop, rotating and things like that. And he was telling me, he's like, all the wheat I have planted right now is planted behind grain sorghum. And he says, historically, the best wheat he's had is behind grain sorghum. And that's exactly what we're talking about, right? After the combines roll, planting wheat, and then it's very successful. I like to call it the synergistic rotational effect, but that wheat's not going to have as many weeds in it because he's going to have planted early milo, April, May, so he wouldn't have had wheat prior. So he's got that rotation, and it's benefiting that wheat.
Yeah.
Now, my historical experience with the crop rotation that Godsey had in out of Lake Carl Blackwell in Lahoma is that in some years that milo is going to dink the crap out of that wheat. But in other years, it's going to benefit, just like what my friend is seeing. And this year might be a year that the wheat might not do so good around that milo, because that milo sucked everything out of the ground in September and then didn't get much to come back. So that's what, and then to follow up to that, we continued talking, and he said, yeah, one of my neighbors, he planted milo, had great milo, and then he planted wheat into it, and it's probably not going to do very well. And it was one of the first years he's ever done that. It is the first year. So that one neighbor's experience is going to be that wheat does poorly behind milo because of the year he tried it. Now, it may be fine because it might rain and we might just end up with a beautiful spring and 70 bushel wheat in Woods County. But right now, the statistics aren't holding that up very good.
So to take a snapshot of that right there, why in the past has his wheat done well following a sorghum crop? What in the soil is benefiting the wheat crop after a sorghum crop in Woods County?
Well, they call it the synergistic rotational effect. If you were to go out there and spend $1 million testing the soil to try to figure out why that is, you would not find it.
Right.
I think, and because we used to back, we're getting old, 10 years ago, that was the real question, when we started doing the No-Till Oklahoma program.
Yeah.
I mean, the farmers in this state have done a tremendous job of figuring out some rotations in a lot of places. It's been wonderful to experience and be a part of that. And people would ask, it's like, well, so why is it better in rotation? And you would try to measure it, and we'd have all these discussions, and you could not measure it.
Yeah.
And what I think it is very small things that are challenging to measure analytically that are coming to a cumulative benefit to the crop, whether it's the presence. Yeah, I mean, whether it's the presence of root channels from the milo, whether it's the milo stalks, catching more snow. I mean, like right now, I can go to a field and there are milo stalks. I can push a rod in the ground a foot on wheat that's planted in milo stalks. I can go across the fence line to the north, and I can push it 4 inches in some places where we've gotten snow, like in northern Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And that's because that ground that was, cultivated or come out of soybeans into wheat, it has no residue. So every mile of that you have north of that grain sorghum stalk is snow you're catching off your neighbors. And there's all kinds of stuff. And then soybeans are just as good. And then guys will see weird stuff where they didn't harvest soybeans, and it's nice and green wheat. And then right next to it where they harvested the soybeans, the wheat doesn't look as good. Yeah. And there's weird stuff going on.
Yeah. And I'll even say, so I think part of the sorghum, because you're right, it's like a lot of times we get dinked behind sorghum with wheat, and it's typically the hot, dry. I'm thinking up in that Woods County, the stuff that I've seen just on wheat management, it shifts some of the wheat management. Just seeing the success we have on wheat management by delaying and making that wheat stress a little bit more.
He thought that maybe delaying it a little bit actually helped.
I really like stressing wheat during the fall and early spring, and guess what? There's aspects of that system that are going to provide little bits of stress, which tends to help some. There's some crops that can succeed with a little bit of stress, like wheat. That's why wheat works in the plain states, is because it's a stressful freaking environment. Unlike other crops that just see stress and just kind of wave their hand and say, I'm done.
Yeah.
Well, I'll go back to it, and then I want to get back to the cover crop aspect. I agree with you on that, but then I disagree with you on saying that some crops are here and some crops are not. I think all crops do, with especially real early, benefit from a little bit of stress, because their natural mechanism then is to grow roots.
I agree.
Right.
And so even soybean, as long as their roots aren't limited, as long as that's not the stress you get, or some of the other ones, like what you don't want is nutrient dense, water dense, all up in the top 4 inches, because then the plant itself is not encouraged, to explore deeper. So I do agree that that's part of it, is that it's planted a little later so we don't get too much top growth on it. We plant it a smidge later so we don't get the growth to it. Yep. The first thing it wants to do is set a good crown and then get some roots, because, based on the photo period as well as the temperature, knows that it's going into winter. So
and I'd even say so for Woods County specifically in that region, I think a lot of our wheats that we plant, we have a tendency to plant in high fertility because we love our anhydrous up front. We like to go low early. We might have little dents. We produce a fair amount of tillers because our varieties are made to tiller. That's what most of them do. And then how many of those tillers in Woods County see May in Woods County and give up the ghost and just fall apart? And so how much of it is a tiller management is that we're not over-resourcing parts of the plant that are not going to make it?
Yeah. Well, and you know, I grew up there, and we like to run cattle. I mean, right?
And you like to work the ground.
Okay. But what I'm saying
does not accept or deny that statement.
I've worked ground in my youth. But anyway, so and that's where we go back to what you want. And so if you're a guy that runs cattle or, you know, cattle lady or whatever, then you want to try to plant it early so you can get that forage because that's your moneymaker.
Absolutely.
I mean, I guess, 500 cows and I want to keep those calves till the spring or whatever, then I want that fall forage, and so I'm going to plant early. And Jeff Edwards did a lot of good work on, and his predecessors did a lot of good work on the ramifications of managing wheat for grazing versus managing wheat for grain production. And if you plant early, that's a 7% dink. And if you graze cattle on that early planted wheat, that's another 7% dink on your wheat yield, right? And the higher your yield potential, the bigger that value is. 7% because it's 14%.
Yep.
And so, like I say, if you want to grow grain and you don't want to mess with running cattle, then you plant it late. And planting after Milo forces you to do that. That's what you're saying.
Yep.
And then you go into the winter with a small plant with hopefully resources that are potentially stored for that spring rapid growth, because that's where you look at. I used to take, when we were doing cover crop stuff, I used to take soil samples to look at soil moisture at planting of the wheat crop, and you can do that, and the cover crop treatment's going to look bad because we'll have a depleted profile. You may have a little bit more moisture in the surface, and so you may or may not have an easier time getting it established depending on the residue load and your ability to deal with that and get seed-soil contact, blah, blah, blah. But then what's really interesting is when you go to March directly prior to the onset of rapid growth, or even going into April and take soil samples then, your soil profile will look different, and that's really the critical water point. Like, you have to have moisture in the profile at the onset of rapid growth, which is April. That's when you start to get stem elongation, and that rapid growth continues right up until post-anthesis. And so, I don't know where I was going with that, but you have a good point in that, but if you use a lot of that moisture in the fall to make this big biomass for cattle grazing, that's where I think you're deking your wheat yield, is you're using that stored moisture, you're accumulating the capacity to extract that soil moisture to make forage, and then you're collapsing in the spring because you've used that much, a little more forage or water or nutrients, whatever.
Well, like I promised, I want to go back to cover crops here. So I have a couple of questions I want to ask you, Jason. First is, we talked about that if you graze it, it's just a forage crop, So do you think that you can get a good, strong soil benefit and graze it at the same time?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll go back to story. Back years ago, when the soil health stuff was really starting to get going, we were still kind of referring to it as soil quality. I was talking to one of the state assistant cons in the NRCS, and I told him, I said, man, it would be so nice if we could just determine compliance for EQIP, CSP, whatever conservation programming, by just taking a soil sample. And the reason and he said, yeah, that would be nice. And the reason I said that is because I had been on a farm that the guy had been running cattle on wheat, graze out, and then cover cropping in the summer, and then sometimes or sometimes not harvesting that cover either through grazing or haying. And I mean, this guy's out in around Kingfisher, and the soil was freaking awesome. I mean, you dig it, and it's just beautiful black, soil with lots of visible biological activity. And he would be completely out of compliance with NRCS programs at the time, because some years, when required by the business plan he had, he would graze the wheat into the ground. Mm-hmm. But then he would rebound that with covers, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so grazing and soil health are certainly intertwined, and that's why I said earlier, that's the beauty of some of the things we've seen in the last 5 years, is the realization is that with thoughtfulness, you can build soil properties under grazing. Some would say you could do it more rapidly under grazing. I would argue that that's more, like you said, I think that's more of an economic deal than it is an actual biological deal, because you can generate revenue off those cattle that you would not otherwise just simply growing a cover crop and killing it.
Yeah.
So I guess the answer to your question is yes. The thing about it is that, shortly after that conversation, we started looking at, the idea of grazing cattle and cover crops. You go to look at farms, and then you see somebody that just run it into the ground. It's just, and when I first started before that, when instead of looking at cover crops as cost share program, we were really cost sharing a lot of no-till and crop rotation on acres to try to increase that from 2008 to now. You'd go out to places that were under contract for no-till management, and it looked like a barren wasteland, dude, because the guy was running continuous graze out. Mm-hmm. He was not tilling. Now, I don't know how they kept him under contract, because you have to technically have intact residue at planting of the following crop. And in this one farm I went to, there was nothing. It was bare dirt, because it had been grazed into the ground, and then when you drove a soil probe into it, it was compacted down to 4 inches. And so that was the fear of grazing in no-till at that time, and it was realized. But you can't slick it off like that multiple years. It's a disaster.
Yeah. So, like, if you were to go into a grazing system, there's a two-parter, and let's say a lot of our folks are probably going to be wheat primarily, and maybe doing covers in the summer or something along those lines. But do you think from a soil health aspect, do you think there's an advantage to doing more than one crop? And what would be, not maybe specific species, but what would be your best situation then for a cover crop planting?
I don't know. Like, if you're wanting to run cattle on it, I would look at the nutritional quality of it and how you're going to extract the value out of it most efficiently with the effort that you are willing to put in. That's a gobbledygook answer. But, years ago, we started a project where we were doing exactly what you're talking about. We're running continuous graze-out wheat with a summer cover crop. We started, and so I was working with Animal Science. There's 90 acres west of town here. And we started off, they asked, well, what kind of cover crop? And I was like, oh, let's go with brown midrib sorghum Sudan. We'll put a little cowpea in there and a little sun hemp or whatever. And so we did that, and we did that for 2 years. The Animal Science guys, they came to me and said, this is too expensive. What about this crabgrass? I'm like, well, are you ever going to plant grain sorghum on this field ever? And they said, no. So then we went out and overseeded it with crabgrass, and now it's kind of come into this weird rotation of wheat and ryegrass and crabgrass, but they pull cattle off, a lot of beef off of it, and it's untamed invasive species of ryegrass, wheat is what we plant, and then crabgrass comes back, and we manage to do that. Now, if you're a grain crop farmer, you don't want to do that, but the cattle guys might be able to do that. And so then you come back to your question: what was happening? The problem is that we'd get that brown midrib big, and they wouldn't have a shipment of cattle to keep it grazed down when it was small. Then it would get big and the forage quality would be declining every day, you kick the cattle out there and you'd have this great big biomass, and they weren't gaining. They'd gain like a pound per day. And I'm not a cattleman, but I grew up on a farm with cattle, and a pound per day is not a lucrative deal. And so, I just had a conversation with some folks from Texas that tried to do that same thing, and they actually said that they were having to feed hay to the cattle along with protein so that they would gain on this summer forage because they let it get so big and so long. And they had a really good growing season, which is good. And one of their goals was to improve the soil health, sequester carbon, all that stuff. And I said, that's the challenge. Is like we have goals of accumulating carbon in the soil and protecting it and like mob grazing, whatever we want to do that. But at the same time, these people, they leased cattle to graze this because they were interested in like the regenerative ag side of it, to regenerate that soil. And they had a really good growing season, so they got all this biomass in this mixed cover crop deal, and then they turned the cattle out there when it was low quality. They had to feed the cattle. Even with that, the cattle didn't gain much because it was hot, low quality. So economically, it was kind of a disaster. And I told them, it's like, that's where we're at. We need to turn those cattle out earlier so we can get some quality gain from the high-quality forage in the early part. But you're going to potentially need to manage your grazing rate. And again, I'm kind of getting out of my comfort zone on grazing stuff, but you have to match the growing rate, the growth rate and quality with how many cattle you can put out there. And if it stops raining, you're going to have to pull the cattle off. In contrast, it's easier just to let it get great big and put the cattle out there, but they're not going to do anything because it's not good. So anyway, I don't know if I answered the question, but that's something. And Alex Roccatelli has done some work on that and kind of considers the same things. You can gain benefit, but like you said at the very beginning, the question is what you want to do and how much you're wanting to put out effort to do it.
Do you want carbon or do you want gain?
Yeah, because like years ago, and this is all kinds of fun to talk about. I had a guy, and he was saying, I want to build carbon. I'm like, all right, we can build carbon. We can get after that. We'll plant sorghum sudan. We'll let it get great big, and we'll lay it back in the down, and we'll just keep growing wheat in rotation with sorghum sudan, and we'll build carbon. But your wheat yields will either suffer or you're going to need to spend more money on nitrogen because that carbon comes at a cost, and that is the need for more nitrogen because you got to have that 20-to-1 ratio or whatever. 21. And then so I was like, oh well, maybe we don't want to grow so much carbon. Maybe I don't want to accumulate the carbon as fast. I'm like, well, like I say, we can manage around all these things. You put cowpeas or mung beans or something out there, you're not going to build carbon.
Nope.
But you're going to grow fairly decent wheat afterwards, and it's going to be greener than, unfertilized fallow wheat.
Yep.
Kind of
well, and it's exactly what you said there. Is that we can get a good grazer, we can get good carbon. Sometimes we can get a little bit of both.
Yeah.
But you take a hit on both sides to potentially meet in the middle. The same thing for. I want to build carbon and put out less nitrogen on my successive crop.
Yeah.
Those are slightly antagonistic views that you can overcome
with time and
with
money.
Time, money, and great management. But it's hard. It's not as easy as just looking at a slick sales sheet and saying I want that one and that one and that one.
Yeah.
So, just real quick, Brian, do you want to go ahead and take your picture?
Yeah. I can take a picture.
No,
okay.
no, take
These
your
guys
picture.
Are too far apart.
We're going to lean in.
We're going to lean in.
Oh, does your phone not have like the?
No, I've got an old phone, David.
Let's see. There you go.
Brian, of course, the social media expert.
I'm telling you, this guy has it going on. So, in the middle of the podcast, he's snapping a picture of us. So,
that's what you do.
Yeah, you got to. But that's real podcasting. That's what we do here at the
proof that it happened.
Exactly. So what you're saying in Elk City?
Oh man, Why are you? Or did you buy some ground in Elk City?
Well,
or something?
Yeah.
It's just
Looking
saying.
really bad.
Just saying. Okay, we'll say Sayer. How's that?
Yeah. Is that closer to the property?
Yeah, actually it is. But no, it really does come down to whenever you're wanting to rotate a cover crop, you really do have to think about your goals and the amount of effort you're wanting to put into it, and the fact if there really needs to be a cover crop.
Well, and I go back to Brian's comment earlier, and he said that we kind of have to be flexible.
Yeah.
And the answer to that is yes and no. If you want to integrate a cover crop, especially as the drier you get, the more you need to plan into the future, because you need to know what your next steps are, and you need to know does this cover crop that you plant here, is it going to affect your step 1, 2, and 3 on down the road? Because there's a potential that the drier we get, the more down the road you need to plan, and you can adjust as you get in there, but you have to have a good plan out. Especially, like I said, especially as the drier you get, the plan needs to be a little bit further out to be successful.
Does it get dry in that area? I can't remember.
You haven't been to that property, have you?
I don't know. I bought it online.
Yeah.
and that's why like places like the Midwest and Pennsylvania, to where cover crops have been very successful, and sometimes in those areas very successful without outside money resources, because it has the environment to sustain massive flexibility with those systems. And I saw it when I was back in Louisiana, is that we were in we ran a project, and I was telling the boys from Mississippi, I was like, this is what you need to do, and they tried it and they're like, it doesn't work. Well, they were a lot further north than us. While they got the same amount of moisture, their temperature regime is not the same, and so that you get some flexibility the longer your growing season is, and the more moisture you have to play with, the more flexible you can get, and that's why I think it's really good that we get good programs here in Oklahoma. We can try to adapt them from other places in the United States, but we have to get good programs from Oklahoma, because things that are going on in northwest or northeast Kansas, up in Nebraska, the Midwest, just potentially aren't going to work at your family's property, I guess, in Elk City. It has to take some smoothing and massaging to get that to work. And the other thing is, we had a CIG, still have the CIG, talking about success of these conservation type systems. And if we get growers to try these cover crops, or even try a good conservation system, our conversations with those growers have suggested that we only have 2 or 3 years for them to lose money before they're gone. And once they leave, Jason can probably tell you, when no-till was coming in, once you leave, the likelihood of you coming back is a lot lower than you coming the first time.
Because it's always in the back of their mind, I had a bad experience.
Yeah, because I failed this. And it is the same thing you were talking about, the wheat and sorghum, is that first year failure. It's important to make sure that you have all the knowledge and all the resources available, because if you fail that first year, or you're talking to a grower that wants to try it and you don't have everything readily there for them, and for them to know the risks and the potential rewards, and they fail not knowing those risks of failure were there, the likelihood of them coming back around next year is probably pretty low.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And a couple of things you said spurred some thoughts in my mind, as far as like a rotation with covers out in that part of the world. There's gonna, when the cover crop people come to town, they're gonna say, oh, well, you're a wheat farmer, so you can grow cover crops in the summer fallow. Well, the question is like, well, what if we don't get any rain in September and October, similar to what happened this year? Well, then maybe I need to be more flexible in my thought process and maybe not plant that wheat and forego that wheat for a summer crop. I think they can be pretty successful with cotton or milo out there, right? Mm-hmm. And so that might get them into that rotation outside of the wheat. Because one thing I've always struggled with this whole cover crop deal, is that a lot of times when we see people talking about cover crops, they're wanting to put it in the fallow period of an otherwise continuous cropping system and not change anything else. Yeah. And for me, you have to rotate.
Yeah.
A rotation is not improved very much by adding a cover in the summer or in the fallow period. Now, there's some caveats to that, because based on the adoption rate, my observation, and the research that's been done, cover cropping cotton in a continuous cotton system, and Katie Lewis down in Texas A&M has shown that there's some benefits to that.
A lot of benefits, yeah.
And it has to do with the protection of that crop from wind and all these different things, and it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at her data too, she'll show that you'll grow better cotton if you rotate with wheat itself and get completely out of that cotton system. Now, I'm not the cotton guy, but if I can increase the lint yields on my crop of cotton with rotating with wheat, and that wheat is profitable enough to pay for what it needs to pay for, cotton, the cost of cotton production is very proportional to the yield.
Yeah.
So the more I make, the more I spend, mostly in the form of harvest cost. Mm-hmm. But it's still better to make more every time the stripper goes through there, right? Mm-hmm. And again, we can get Seth on here next week or whatever. But if I can rotate, there's an idea that I can't rotate out of that primary cash crop, so I'm going to cover crop. But if the benefits of rotating out of it and growing something else for one season and then coming back to it, if those benefits to that main cash crop overwhelm the reduced revenue from the wheat, which may or may not be true with $10 wheat, then that's kind of something to think about. And so right now we may have an opportunity to try some of that. But that's always been my challenge with the cover crop program, is that we're not going to change the rotation. And I'm telling you, cover cropping in the summer fallow will not clean up the rye or ryegrass,
right.
cheater brome, and your frickin' wheat.
Yeah.
It will not. In fact, it could make it worse. I've seen observations where if you're planting cover crops, killing them, planting wheat back into it, you're reducing the vigor of that wheat to such a degree that it increases the likelihood of, say, horseweed infestation, and that's a real thing. And so to rotate out, you know what I mean?
So one thing I heard you say in there was basically whenever you're considering a cover crop rotation, you should do it as a rotation, not as to fill the gap.
Well, think about what, again, it goes back to what Josh is saying. He's such a wise man.
I tell you.
I don't believe that.
What is your goal? Do you want to clean up a wheat field
right.
that's infested with ryegrass?
Right.
Well, I tell you what, there's guys, organic wheat farmers, that don't use any herbicide in western Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. They keep their wheat fields clean, and they do not grow summer crops. They grow oats and spring forage mm-hmm. or grain crops, cool season grains, and they forego their weed practices, and so they can wait and cultivate or terminate that field in this, like, January, February, mm-hmm. plant oats, get a crop, and then bring it back down to wheat. And I've seen it to the property line where they have no rye and their neighbors are covered with rye. And it's because they rotated out of the fall planted continuous winter wheat.
Well, and we've said it a lot, and go back to that question, Dave, is I don't think if that is the only thing you're doing, that mm-hmm. can't be successful as a rotation. We say it a lot with double crop soybean. Like continuous wheat farmer, I rotate, I have double crop soybean. Well, that's not truly a rotation. That's just adding in a crop in the fallow that you didn't have before. That's not going to help with your rye. That's not going to help with other things. If anything, it's going to have you plant your wheat later, which potentially again can't compete. So,
and that's I think a lot of reason why our friends saw improved wheat is because in order to get that successful you could double crop milo and go back to wheat, but he was really talking about early planted milo, going back to wheat coming back to stubble, double cropping that, and then harvesting that in the fall, and then coming back to milo the spring, and then planting wheat right into that. You know what I mean? Yep.
I tell you what, this has been a great conversation. I really hate to wrap it up, but is there anything else we need to cover with that? I mean, we've talked soil samples, we've talked rotations, we've talked cover crops. Is there any parting words you have?
Well, I'll go back to kind of stress on the cover crops because I was just poking the bear on the soil sampling, but the cover crops is they can work and they do work. You can't just plug them in and then walk away. Mm-hmm. They're a crop, and you have to manage them, and in fact, you probably have to manage more than you would with just a crop rotation. It takes a little bit more management and a lot more thinking, especially if you're bringing cattle into the equation, than just saying, hey, I'm going to rotate and into a cover crop and go for it. So, yeah, if you're going to do cover crops, really get with a crop consultant, a crop advisor, us at Oklahoma State, your county educator, NRCS. You really have to get a lot of your ducks in a row to be successful.
And don't be afraid if it does fail the first year.
Yeah. And as long as you have the knowledge that it will.
Right.
Or that it can.
Yeah.
Not that it will,
yeah.
that it can.
Brian? Oh, sorry. Brian? Nothing? Shaking his head no. Jason?
Yeah, I agree with Josh. I mean, you just have to think about what you want and try to achieve that. And if it doesn't work out exactly the way you perceived, or, you go to a meeting and they say, oh, just do this and that, and oh, this beautiful thing will happen. Well, it might not. And just be ready to take advantage of what it comes, or at least mitigate challenges that could happen, however it turns out, and then be flexible enough and think about rotating out and try. I mean, that's the beauty, and I mentioned it earlier, is that in Oklahoma we have seen such a tremendous change in agriculture since I left here in 2001 to go to graduate school on the East Coast. I mean, I used to drive from here to home, and all you'd see is wheat fields.
Yeah.
And you can still find places where that's the case.
Yeah.
But a lot of places we have more and more rotation. We still have dominated by wheat and grass and pasture, and that's the way it's always going to be. We're continuously losing cropland to pasture, and for whatever reason, but we're seeing more of a change in the thinking of we don't have to do the same things we've always done. Cover crops have probably been a part of that. But, don't think, like Josh says, to get the soil health benefits according to his stuff, and he's done good work on this with his team.
Good job.
Is that you don't have to grow cover crops to get biological improvements of the soil. Yep. And so that's what I'm saying. If that's your program and you feel more comfortable doing that, fine. But you could grow cash crops too.
Well, and I think we've talked about it a lot, is soil health and cover crops are not the same thing.
No.
And a lot of people are understanding that, but the more people that do, cover crops are a way to improve soil health, but there's a lot of ways to improve soil health.
Yeah, and that was so cool, is, we had this meeting down in Altus, and one of Katie Lewis's people came up, and he did a freaking awesome job talking about the data, had soil health data, yield on this cotton rotation down in Lubbock. And one of the growers said, thanked him. He's like, thank you. Because the kid said, biological activity and character of the soil is in no way, related to the crop performance. Mm-hmm. And to a lesser extent, vice versa. But the farmer said, well, that's what we need to know, because the student, I wish I could remember his name, so I give him props because he did an outstanding job. But the student said it's more about residue management. Mm-hmm. Can I plant into the residue that I create? If I can't, I'm going to have a problem. So then I have to figure out, how do I manage the residue to get it to an optimum condition for that cotton crop? And if I can do that, then I can improve success. But it's not just the microbes in the soil, because they analyzed all this stuff, and even the carbon. They could build carbon, but it wouldn't always equate to improved profitability. And so there's a lot of stuff. What do you want to do? Because you can't do it all, is the challenge.
The longest final words I think I've ever heard.
Sorry.
We're just starting with one.
We're going to be here for another 3 or 4 hours.
I got another meeting.
So.
I was going to say, you got a meeting, and we're cutting it close.
Well, actually, it's 11, and I knew we'd go late.
Oh, so we have time.
No.
Okay.
We don't have time. I need to be done.
You're the one talking.
Man, oh man, was that an adventure. Thank you for listening in on the conversation on the Red Dirt Agronomy Podcast. And if you would like to join the conversation, just send us an email. It's as simple as typing podcast at reddirtagronomy.com into your email browser, or you can just send us a tweet. Our handle is reddirtag. To find any of the resources that we talked about on today's podcast, visit reddirtagronomy.com. There you will find show notes, and you can listen to past episodes too. For Dr. Josh Lofton, Dr. Jason Warren, Dr. Brian Arnell, and I am Dave Deacon, we all want to thank you for listening. The preceding is a copyrighted recording of Agnow Media LLC 2022. And of course, all rights are reserved.